seminar, somebody said, so, what do you think? So, Pablo, what do Mexicans think? As though the one person knows everything about an entire culture, right? It's called being asked to report. It's exhausting. People don't like it. And when you do it, you show that you're already sort of biased. Because you think, because again, we never say, hey, so what do white guys think? Larry Wilmore used to do that as a joke on his show, like, oh, so what do white people think about this? And then again, we make generalized comments, right? So I said, so white guys like to grill, or women usually don't like to grill, right? So making generalized comments about groups, again, ask yourself, why are you doing it? Is it useful? To what end, right? And like I said, when you mark your friends, when you qualify them, or a student, right? So this will be something interesting, because in general, if you're teaching in central Pennsylvania, most of your kids will be white kids, unless you're in a city, right? Most of your kids will be white kids, and then when you have somebody who's not a white kid, you'll be like, oh, yeah, well, so my, Mexican kid. So interestingly, you'll use those adjectives to mark the diversity of a student in your classroom, because it makes it easier to distinguish them, but you should really ask yourself, why are you doing that? Because you wouldn't say, oh, I have this white kid who does this, right? So marking identity when it's not necessary to the story. Now, when could it be important? You might say, I have a Mexican-American student who wants to celebrate Cinco de Mayo. Now, that makes sense. That sentence makes sense, right? I have an African-American student who thinks it would be neat to organize a Kwanzaa celebration for school. Again, that makes sense, because then you're talking about the sentence, the adjective describing the identity of the student is related to the thing you're saying. If you say, I have a Mexican student who failed his math test, that doesn't make sense. You don't need to include that, right? So start thinking about that. The other thing is asking people who look different where they're from. How many people in this room get asked, where are you from? Right? Where are you from? And then you say, Pittsburgh. And they go, no, where are you really from? Pittsburgh. Right? And you're like, oh, you mean you want me to confess my ethnic identity to you, because this is information. Again, white people don't get this, right? I go to them, I'm like, Emily, where are you from? Like, as though, like, you must tell me. And so one of the things that's also interesting is that we tend to think that people who look a little different should be telling us what their actual heritage is all the time when we hardly know them. Whereas one would think that's the kind of thing that we get to know over time, right? So being asked to explain yourself is one of those things that you want to watch if you're doing it, right? You want to think about that. All right. So, what I'm trying to explain to you is that prejudice itself is really, really, really difficult to undo. And the only way to begin to really do it is to recognize that we all are stakeholders in it. Okay? So it doesn't get better if I sort of go, look, here are the victims over here, and here are the perps. Here's the people doing it, and here's the people having it done to them. It doesn't work like that. So I need to, the biggest job I have is to convince everyone in the room that everything gets better when we work on these issues together. It doesn't get better if I start making you feel crappy about yourself, or think, oh, I'm such a bad person because I've done this or that. First of all, we all do it. We all do it. Again, the Syrian refugees have ideas about you guys too, right? We all do it, so we don't get better if we don't see this as something that matters to everybody, right? So we all have to be stakeholders. We can't have it be good guys versus bad guys. That's very stupid. And that was, again, one of the things that happened early on in this. I'm not doing those. Okay, so challenges to empathy. Again, empathy is caring about others. I've explained to you, it's not natural. Young kids are really good at it, but they get sort of taught out of it over time. So depending on the age of the kids you're working with, that'll be an issue. All right, so let's just talk about, I told you that one of the things that's interesting is that most diversity training backfires, right? So most diversity training is really about like avoid certain kinds of ways of talking. You get a lot of rules. You may get these in your schools, right? Okay, the reason why it doesn't work is that most of it's about preventing lawsuits and not really about trying to make the classroom a better place, right? It'll say it's about trying to create an inclusive environment, but what it tends to do is to teach people to be really like hyper aware and anxious, which has a significant blowback because then people don't share, right? They feel tense. And so it creates unproductive feelings of guilt. It can create resentment, right? The white guy's like, why do I have to care? It's not my problem. And even more, it can often lead to jokes and mockery, right? Because people need an outlet for their frustrations. So what does work? One is to understand how prejudice works as opposed to giving people lists of words or whatever that they're not going to do. And see it from the inside and out, right? Stop creating the victim perps distinction. And again, start to understand the facts behind your assumptions so that you can sort of disentangle this idea that there's groups of people that deserve what they've got. And start to be, again, sort of just much more aware of your own habits, right? So think to yourself, okay, today I'm going to try to pay attention and catch myself the one time I make an assumption that's not a productive one, right? And give yourself a break, right? So one of the most important things is not to be really judgy. The whole point of prejudice is the issue of judging all the time. Don't judge all the time, including yourself. Give yourself a break. Try to start to learn how that habit happens and see if you can make it better. So way more small steps. The other thing that's important is that if you're someone who has people do practice prejudice with them, they say, where are you from? You say, well, where are you from? Right? So one of the things that happens a lot is you hear people saying stuff that's disrespectful. How do you learn how to get that out of those habits out, right? So noticing how you use language markers, things like that, can be just little subtle things, right? All right, so what we're going to do now is break you guys into, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to break you guys into groups. So the goal is that what we're going to do is we're going to try to have you work on an in-class project you could have your students do that would help them start to be more sensitive to some of these topics. And some of you guys are like, yeah, but I'm teaching math. We're going to show you how you can do it in every different discipline. Okay, so let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll meet back here.